stars who are your company dance with you. Teach us the mystery of your dance. We may be in harmony with you. Learn to give away and renew. Oh, Moon Mother, your loving gaze falls softly on the sacred mountains. Oh, Moon Mother, your shining gaze falls softly on the sacred oceans. Sacred plants dance in the light of the night, dancing in harmony with you. Ocean waves dance in the light of the night, dancing in harmony with you. Teaching us to give away and renew. Fall softly on the sacred mountains. Oh, Moon Mother, your shining gaze falls softly on the sacred oceans. Oh, Moon Mother, light of night, the stars who are your company dance with you. Teach us the mystery of your dance. We may be in harmony with you. Learn to give away and renew. Learn to give away and renew.
Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. Now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Hey, Merry meet everybody, and welcome to Stirring the Cauldron here on Para X Radio. My guest tonight is Christopher Penczak. He's a witch, a teacher, a writer, and a healing practitioner. His practice draws upon the foundation of both modern and traditional witchcraft, blended with the wisdom of mystical traditions from across the globe. He's a practitioner and teacher of shamanism, tarot, Reiki healing, herbalism, astrology, Qabalah, and the founder of the Temple of Witchcraft tradition and system of magical training based upon the material of his books and classes. Tonight we're going to be talking about his book, The Three Rays of Witchcraft. The book outlines a model of the universe based upon the forces of power, love, and wisdom. And in current times, we all need a little bit of wisdom as well, as a cohesive path to follow, because I really think it's been scattered way too many directions for way too long. If anybody has any questions or comments for Christopher during the show, please send me a private message and we'll get right to them. And now, please join me in welcoming Christopher Penczak. Hi, and I hope you can help unscatter us all.
Hey Marla, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm going to start out by saying that while your book is complex and not really an easy read per se, I think the concept is simple in its complexity, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Because I think I was trying to overthink it when I started to read it. And, but the interesting thing is that you say it may not be a book for beginners, but I think everyone can get something out of it, especially the beginners, because they're coming into it without any preconceived notions. So it might be actually easier for them than some others who might be kind of stuck in their ways. What do you think?
That can definitely be true. I know a lot of people who are looking for kind of a beginner's book, though, are usually looking for, this is how to cast a circle, this is how to cast a spell, and I think if they pick up this book and that's what they're looking for, they might be surprised.
Well, you've got a lot of charts and graphs and exercises and really good things in there, and in a way it could be a primer. When I first opened it, I'm like, whoa, is this even above my head? But, it's not as complex as I made it. I just kind of started shooting myself in the foot right off the bat. But the first thing that really struck me about the concept of the three rays related to a question that I'm often asked, I'm sure you are too, and that is, how many types of witchcraft are there? And it's an easy one to answer in that there are just practically as many types of the craft practice as there are practitioners.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
I was going to say absolutely. I mean, I think that's the easiest way to define it. I think everybody has their own personal practice, and all those things can be witchcraft. But there were certain strands that were important to me, and trying to reconcile those strands of teaching into something cohesive has been kind of my passion lately. So that's how the Three Rays came about.
Well, yeah, and the thing of it is, first of all, I loved your comment about people having the magpie syndrome. When they're starting out, gathering the things that are bright and shiny. That was a great mental picture.
Great.
But the Three Rays are so appealing because, as I said before, what you've done is taken the past traditions, blended them with the modern view of the craft, and come up with something very, very cohesive, a new system of magic. And I think what's really important is that you feel strongly about the ancestors and the old ways being acknowledged, because I think so many neo-pagans think they can reinvent the wheel. Agreed?
Absolutely. I think to have something last, it has to have a strong foundation. If you think of it as a tree, it has to have deep roots. And I think some people focus their practice on the deep roots and just what's come before, and a lot of people have focused on the branches of the tree and, where we're going. But I think if you have a tree that has a lot of branches and not a lot of roots, then it falls over. And, a tree that has a lot of roots but no branches doesn't really survive. So, to kind of use that metaphor, I wanted to have something that had both. So I want to really, dive deep into the past, not only in witchcraft, but in a lot of magical traditions that have influenced me that are not classically witchcraft, like Theosophy or Qabalah, but also to see how that's influenced me as someone who really identifies as a witch, and how am I taking those nutrients to feed my tree and, grow strong branches too.
It's almost like Miracle Grow, because it works really well.
That's a great idea, yeah.
So how did the concept of the three rays, I don't know why that's so hard for me to say, how did the concept come to you?
It really came through what I would call divine inspiration. One of the key teachings of the book is about Awen, or Awen, which is a Welsh concept of divine inspiration, and it's really what the symbol is based on for the three rays. And I was in meditation, and I'm really always trying to reconcile and understand all the different pieces of what I use. And I come from more of a modern witchcraft background, and influenced by a lot of Wicca and neo-paganism, but also very interested in a lot of folkloric traditions, and studied Druidism and studied Qabalah and studied various forms of core shamanism and Celtic shamanism. And a lot of the things fit really well together, but a lot of the things don't clearly fit together, or the ways that they fit weren't clear to me. So those are the things I think about. Those are the things I meditate on. And in meditation, I ended up receiving a vision. And the vision was very clear and very similar to the image that the modern Druids use today for Awen, for this inspiration from the gods. And it's three dots kind of arranged like a pyramid, and descending down from them are three rays, three lines, surrounded by three circles. But in my vision, one of the rays was a straight line like a spear, and one of the rays on the other side of it was a bent line like a branch that had flowers and leaves on it. And then in the center between those two rays was a serpent kind of going back and forth, and the serpent had ram horns, and it was very intricate in my mind. But it was almost like a download, like I received all this information at once, and I kind of bolted out of meditation and grabbed my notebook and just started writing and started playing around with some of the ideas that were in the writing. And within 9 days, I had the first draft of what would become the book. And I worked with it with other people and refined it, and kind of put some poetry and art that was inspired by those experiences. But the gist of the philosophy kind of came out in 9 days, and the overall structure of the book came out in that time. And then I just kind of sat with it and tried to put it into my own personal practice, and tried to share it with some people, and did some experimental workshops, and found people were benefiting from it. So I wanted to share it in a book.
Yeah, it's really amazing. It sounds like something that couldn't possibly have been done in 9 days, because it's so intricately planned out and plotted out, if that makes sense. There's just so much there.
I think the great thing for me about it is, some people who followed my writings for a while have commented that although it sounds like my writing style, it's also, has a different quality to it. And I don't necessarily call it a channeled writing because it wasn't a channeled writing or it wasn't automatic writing, but it was definitely had that divine inspiration. It worked out, and the process for the book was very different from, a lot of my other books, and the pieces just really kind of fell into place. There wasn't a lot of logical thought about it. It was really kind of that inspired thought that, you look at the notes that you got from that first couple nights, and they just fit together like this, and it all made kind of perfect sense, which is why it flowed so well.
Yeah. Well, okay, so you were mentioning that the rays represent the mysteries of power, love, and wisdom through the straight, bent, and crooked paths of the witch.
Right.
This might be a good time to explain those paths to some that may not be familiar.
Sure. Well, I have some friends that are involved in traditions of witchcraft that they would describe as kind of pre the neo-pagan movement and pre-Gardnerian Wicca. And they often talked about, there's a saying in these movements, they're known as traditional craft or traditional cunning folk, by a straight line, by a bent line, by a crooked line, or some say by a bent line, a straight line, a crooked line. And it represents the energies of the circle and the kind of ritual space and the forces of the land and the sky that they're working with. But it also was described to me as three paths of evolution, and that the straight line really related to the mysteries of the sacred king and the mysteries of the land, and particularly what we call ley lines today, or what used to be called dragon lines, and how the king and the land were one, and that was the way they related to the world. And it was really about what their higher purpose was for their people, because the king was really like the high priest to the people, much like a pharaoh in Egypt. And then they described the bent line as having to do a lot with kind of the twisting and turning and spiraling of the fairy mysteries and the descent into the underworld, and really kind of working deeply with the spirits of nature and the spirits that support nature, and kind of really opening the heart to the aspects of divine love through nature, which isn't really a sentimental love, but kind of a perfect love or unconditional love or all-encompassing love of creation. And then they described the witch's path as kind of going between these two, and described it as the crooked path, or the serpent's path. And the idea that it's, in my mind, of what kind of came out with this, is that the witch is continually moving towards this king's path and the higher will of what's good for the people and the world and higher consciousness, and then moving towards this love of nature and the fairy realm, and that the crooked path really dealt with the mystery of the animals and the mystery of the ancestors and the creatures of flesh and blood. And so the witch's path or the magician's path kind of encompasses, all three of these ideas. And so to me, I really related it a lot to my theosophical teachings in theosophical material and kind of the stuff that's influenced New Age ascension lore. There's the science of the 7 rays, and Alice Bailey depicted a system, and people have adapted it since then. And it seems like it's a magical technique based on the 7 colors of the rainbow, but the first 3 rays are based on the primary colors. And they've basically been boiled down to red being power, blue being love, and yellow being what they used to call active intelligence, or what some people call wisdom. And that really kind of fit in nicely. And then if you study the Qabalah and the Tree of Life, there's 3 pillars. And I started to see parallels in my meditations with the oak, ash, and thorn, and all these different figures of 3s. And even, when we think of the triple goddess and we think of the triple soul, there's all these 3s that kind of come up in my own personal practice. And figuring out how they fit on this mandala and how they fit in this worldview was part of the unfolding of the book.
Well, that's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is the 3 patterns, because they're very much in the book, and then when you sit there and think about it, they're very much all over the place. I mean, they say good things come in 3s, but, your book is filled with 3, starting with the triune divinity. Then there are the 3 rays, the 3 races, the 3 journeys, the 3 cauldrons, which I want to talk to in a little while. But let's talk a little bit about the genesis of these triple patterns. How do you... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, so much of witchcraft has been taught previously, at least when I first got involved in it, is it's such a dualism, and it was light and dark, and god and goddess, and waxing and waning. And while I think that's important, I think it's actually really important to look at divinity and spirituality through all different sequences and all different numbers and all different symbols. But a lot of people focus in on the duality and the polarity. And while I think that can be very powerful, I think kind of the next stage in our magical philosophy is what's the force that connects the two. So whenever you have two extremes, there's always going to be a third connecting force. And that idea of connection has been really powerful in my own practice. So I can see why it would, unconsciously or otherwise kind of influence this inspired writing that came to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really interesting. Now, the other thing, you talk about each ray being associated with a race of spiritual entities with whom we partner. That there are three races embodied by the glyph of the three rays, angelic, fairy, and human. And you feel it's important for those following the path of the witch to build relationships with other streams of life, and I agree. Now, we always look upon them as our guides, our allies, our helpers, but you mentioned that we must become theirs as well. And it might be difficult for some to believe that we can actually do something to help them because they're always looked upon as the wiser, smarter than we are. So what is it that we can do to help them? How does that play out?
I think one of the advantages that we have that's different from our spiritual allies is we're here in the world. We're in flesh and blood. We have hands, we have feet, we have voices, we have eyes. And there's certain things that we can do quite easily in the world that is much more difficult for a spirit to accomplish by itself. I think it's always about like that process of threes. There's the two extremes, there's the above and below, and we stand in between. And really it's about getting to that place of recognizing the sacredness of the between place. Between places have always been sacred, and this middle world, this earthly plane, a lot of traditions think of it as something like we need to escape and get away from. But I believe it's one of the most sacred places. And so we're working with the spirits. They each have their own nature, but it's hard for them to veer from their nature, and we're a connecting force to connect to the spirits above and the spirits below. So sometimes, like in my relationships with spirits, it's been about the spirits asking me to do things in the physical world, like to make contact with another person, to express a certain point of view, to advocate for nature, to advocate for a connection or a healing. But the fact that I'm physically present, I can make connections in the world and with other people and other places in ways that spirits have difficulty. So they can have this non-terrestrial wisdom and they can have this non-terrestrial energy, but it's easier for me to, to reach across the room and pick up an object and move it across the room than it is for a spirit's energy to do that. And not that that has a practical purpose, but in the world, there's ways of probably the most profound experience I had in the beginning of my practice was a goddess asked me to connect her to a particular person in my work environment who I was afraid that person would think, I was crazy because it was, before I was really out of touch and, very, very clear with that. But I think I planted a seed for that person's future spirituality and where they might go in their own healing path. I don't think they became a witch, but I think they were open to some of the healing practices that I talked to them about. But I talked to them about it because this particular goddess asked me to, because it was easier for her to hear the message from me, flesh and blood, than to believe a dream, believe in meditation, So we have to be able to be that bridge. And I think that's really the purpose of humanity. That middle line, that serpent's path, is we're reaching towards the heavens and the angelic realm, and we're reaching towards the underworld and the fairy realm. And, we're that connecting force. If we're not there, then those two realms are kind of separate.
Well, I think people sometimes, and I learned something, it's really good that I did, about this, because when you were talking about the angelic realm, you said that people think, and well, you didn't say this, I'm saying this, people think that angels are all love and light and out to help us and have a vested interest in our welfare and truly care on a personal level. But the way you describe it is that they're more like worker bees, in a sense, with no desire or will of their own. They're just doing the work of the divine, which is something that I never came to mind.
Yeah, it's a strange concept for a lot of people. I think there's been a great, I don't want to say schism in our angelic lore, but I think our angelic lore took some different turns, and a lot of what I base my experiences and information kind of goes back to older traditional magical sources. I think once the spiritualist movement began in the 1700s and we had pioneers in the spiritualist movement start equating our ancestors with angels because, ancestral reverence wasn't Christian, but the idea of thinking that grandma died and became an angel, angels became a lot more personal. And so, a lot of people who practice angelic magic and angelic healing today from more of a modern perspective have that very personal nature to it and think everything's angelic. But if you really go back to a lot of root sources, whether it be Kabbalistic sources or even early Christian and Islamic sources, if you even get into the imagery that we find of angels in the Old Testament and compare it to Egyptian and Sumerian and Persian, mythologies, you'll find that there's a lot of pagan roots, in my opinion, to angels, but they're not sentimental. They're not, it's not really personal. Like one of the funny lines that I used to start my angel class with, but realized it got a lot of people upset, is that, talking about the nature of the angels, I'd say the angels don't love you. And people would get very upset thinking the angels are all about love. The angels are so close to divinity that we can feel that divinity and experience it as love, but their job isn't to love you. Their job is usually to oversee some aspect of the universe or to communicate something from the universe to the human world. The real idea of angel means messenger. It doesn't mean buddy. But we've kind of equated angels with ancestors and beloved dead and spirit guides, and in the ancient world, those were different types of spirits. And I think it's important to understand the nature. A lot of my experiences with angels and understanding their nature has been directed from the angels themselves and my experiences with them. They're not very human. They're often described in the Old Testament as beasts and vortexes of light and, much more like pagan gods and sphinxes and mythical creatures than, our Renaissance image of the angels being like people that are kind of androgynous and, wanting to wish us well. So I think angels will manifest however you'll be receptive to them to understand them, but I think their true nature is probably closer to the Older Testament, information than our modern lore.
Well, and it's kind of the same thing with fairies, because as you said in the book, most people think about fairies as being Tinkerbells and little tiny things with wings. And I mean, I've heard, read, and not fortunately witnessed, but I mean, there are some fairies that are, as big as a house kind of thing. And that's just not the concept that we have. We want the cute little Tinkerbelly guys going around, but in actual fact, I think we just, like with angels, guardian angels, that's all we think of. And as you said, the Renaissance depiction of them. With fairies, we want them all to be kind of Hollywood fairies, floating around. But I think people don't realize that something is an angel, something is a fairy, that it's not just one thing. I mean, there are so many different types.
Right, just like there's many different types of animals, there's many different types of all the main races. So, just as if we have many different creatures of flesh and blood, we have many different races of angels. And, if you look in the lore of angels, there's all these in the Christian tradition. They have 9 choirs. In the Kabbalistic tradition, they have 10 different orders. In the fairy folkloric tradition, it seems like different races of fairies all kind of coexist. And I'm a big believer in looking at world mythologies, and you'll actually find, different descriptions of fairies based on different continents and different lands. I think if you go to Tibet and you read about the Naga serpents and the serpent people who live under the ground, I mean, they don't seem like fairies to us, but they kind of fulfill a very similar function to fairies. And the thing that I find very interesting is the types of offerings to the Tibetan serpent people are also the same types of offerings that we use in the Celtic fairy traditions. They like things that are white. They like things that are rich. They like things that are creamy. They like things that are intricate and take a lot of human effort to it, but particularly they like white things. So when I see that thread kind of across cultures, I realize there's something similar going on there, and I always like to see those connections across the world.
I think that the sad part is that most of us don't either have the time or the inclination to really delve deeper into all these things. We take things at face value, what we hear, and there's just so much more to it if you just do a little bit of digging.
Right.
And that digging, I think, is really important, because, having a one-dimensional view or idea of something doesn't get us very far in the learning process. But
absolutely. I think we have a great opportunities, but we also have great difficulties right now. I used to describe it to my students as that we live in the time of the great blessing and the great curse. And the great blessings, we never before have we had access to so much information. Like, even before the internet, you could go to any library and read about Greek myths, Norse myths, Celtic myths, Tibetan Buddhist traditions, Hindu traditions, and have it all under one roof. and that's such a great blessing, but it's also a great curse because never before have we had so much information. So when you have an experience, if you're not rooted in a particular culture or tradition, you have to figure out what it means to you, and that requires a lot of research. You might experience owl as a vision and as a totem animal, but owl to the Greeks was very different than owls to the Jews, was very different from owls to the Celts, was very different from owls to the Native Americans. So, which type of owl energy were you connecting to? So you have to research all of that and figure out what it means to you. So it's difficult. I think one of the problems and one of the hopefully solutions we'll have in modern witchcraft today is kind of digging our roots deeper, kind of coming together with more cohesive visions and being able to teach that as a foundation to students coming into it. So just as if you were to come into Tibetan Buddhism, you'd have kind of a clear point of reference to study. I think there's so much in modern witchcraft today, but it's so disconnected in so many ways. There's not a good foundation to kind of figure out what all the philosophies and the mystical experiences mean. So I'm looking forward to seeing what people come up with that, and that's what a lot of my work's focused on at this point too.
Exactly, and without being able to do that, without being able to take advantage of everything that's out there, it's kind of hard for us to find a path that fits right, because sometimes you'll pick up things just because you think you're supposed to, but it may not work for you, but you don't know any better, you don't know where to look, you don't know where to go. So, having that knowledge base and being able to dig a little bit deeper is really, I think, a great thing.
Absolutely. I think a big part of what we need to do is synthesize as a greater culture, but also synthesize as an individual. Part of magic is connecting to your higher self, what they used to describe as your genius. And it's not just genius in being smart, but it's a creative genius, a religious genius. And I think a job of a good teacher is to help you unlock that genius and connect to it. And once you have all your shiny pieces, once you have all your parts, what do you build it into? What's your cohesive vision? So even if people don't use this for themselves and don't agree with it for themselves, I hope it just inspires them to figure out what their visions are and, express them and share them.
Yeah, I think, we never need to stop growing and learning and never be complacent. I mean, that's the way it is because we'll never know it all. Yep. But, hopefully a lot of us are going to give it hell trying, right?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Well, we are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to talk about something to do with cauldrons. So everybody hang in. We'll be back with Christopher Penczak right after this.
Hey, gang, Stirring the Cauldron. We'll be right back after this commercial break.
This is Dave.
And this is John.
Join us for the Para X radio show on CBS Radio and Para X Radio Network.
Sundays, 8 p.m. Eastern on www.para-x.com.
Coming this fall from Schiffer Books. From the author of the Ghost of Hollywood series and Workplace Spells comes a brand new book for all lovers of pets. Animal Spells and Magic by Marla Brooks. Learn how to choose your next pet according to their astrological sign. Explore animal superstitions. Learn 25 magic spells for your pets and get instructions on creating your own spells. Learn who to call upon and what to use to cast these spells. Includes special chapters by Reverend Tim Shaw, Psychic to the Stars Kenny Kingston, Psychic Medium Victoria Gross, Animal Communicator Dinah Roseberry, and Shaman Willie Windwalker Gibson. This is the perfect book for all animal lovers. Animal Spells and Magic by Marla Brooks. For details on how to get your copy of this amazing new book, go to www.schifferbooks.com or check out Marla Brooks online at www.marlabrooks.com. This would make the perfect gift for the animal lover in your life. Go to www.schifferbooks.com or ask about it at your local bookstore. If you're tired of fumbling in the dark with a flashlight to read your EMF meter, then the folks at Professional Measurement have the solution for you. Introducing the Mel Meter. The Mel 8704 is a precision-made scientific instrument designed especially for the paranormal investigator and enthusiast. This is the only meter that can read both EMF and temperature changes at the same time. An easy-to-read backlight display allows you to monitor and record changes in real time with one hand. And check out the new Pro Navigator with night vision compatible red light source and 30 feet of illumination range. This is the tool you've been waiting for. The Millimeter. Available now at promeasurement.com or by calling 1-888-344-0111. Professional Measurement. Your one-stop source for industrial and commercial-grade precision EMF meters and instruments.
When the sun goes down, do you start to crave something dark and decadent? Vampire wear has something for your immortal soul. Jewelry, accessories, and if you dare, vampire wear. Home of the Tribal Fang necklace, complete with certificate of authenticity, except no other. Get your vampire wear at vampirewear.com. We always get what we pray for.
Janine Marks, a 12-year-old, was fairly normal. She spent a lot of time online. One day, she met a new friend. The new friend had the same problems at home. They liked the same bands. They worried about the same subjects in school. They promised to keep each other's secrets. They wished they went to the same junior high. The new friend had good news. He said he was going to be in Janine's area one Saturday. He thought it would be amazing if they could just hang out, go to the mall. Janine agreed. The new friend didn't want parents messing this up. Janine showed up alone. So did her new friend, who wasn't in junior high, wasn't nice, and wasn't a 14-year-old boy. Every day, children are sexually solicited online. Help delete online predators. Call 1-800-THE-LOST or visit cybertipline.com to learn how to protect your kids' online life. A message from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the Ad Council.
And welcome back to Stirring the Cauldron. Here's Marla Brooks.
And I don't need to say welcome back because he just did. My guest tonight is Christopher Penczak, and we're talking about his book, The Three Rays of Witchcraft. And it's fascinating, as I was saying before. And there are things that I'm picking up left and right, which is always a great thing. And there are a lot of rituals and exercises in the book that lead up to the Garden of the Gods ritual. And I want to talk about a couple of them, Christopher. First, about the concept of the Cauldron of Posey. Is that the way you pronounce it?
That's it.
Where each person is said to be born with 3 cauldrons or energy points within the body. Now, how do these differ from chakras, and what do they represent?
Well, this concept isn't something that I particularly came up with, but it's a simplification of the chakra system for a lot of people. Most people are familiar with the chakras as being 7 energy points that run along the spine and relate to Hindu mythology and Ayurvedic healing practices. And it's kind of been adopted into Reiki and New Age lore and modern witchcraft. It's something that I teach in my witchcraft classes because it's very helpful. There was a Celtic poem, an Irish poem, called The Cauldron of Posey, and some scholars, and I first came across it through the work of Caitlin Matthews, kind of described it in the way that it was pitched and described. They, of course, didn't use the word chakra, but as you read it, it's hard to not look at it from a mystical point of view and think that the Celts were talking about some type of energy points that would be akin to chakras, but they describe them as cauldrons. And if you look in some other Eastern lore, particularly Taoist alchemy and some Chinese traditional medicine, there's other energy points that are different from the chakras that are often described as vessels and cauldrons and warmers and very much the same type of container type of imagery to energy. And so this kind of simplifies our view of energy centers in the body. And one of the things that I learned that's been very helpful for me in reconciling a lot of these systems was something from the magician John Michael Greer. He describes in one of his books, I think it was Circles of Power, that the energy centers within our body are kind of like a string on a musical instrument. So just think of the central tube that's kind of parallel to your spine as like a string. And different traditions teach you to tune it and to kind of press down in different ways. So if you are trained in the chakra system, you get the 7 notes, the 7 chakras. Mm-hmm. If you focus in on the Kabbalistic systems, you get 5 points, and they go all the way down to your feet. There's some New Age lore that divides the chakras into 12 points. And if you look at the Tibetan chakra system, it also has 5 points, very similar to the Kabbalistic one, so it's a little different from the Hindus. And all these people who are very skilled and learned in magical systems know how to use them, and they all work equally effective, just in different contexts. So, what's the truth here? I'm always trying to figure out what the truth is. Are the chakras absolutely real, or is there different ways of looking at it? So this is one way that kind of fits the European view, because there's not really a lot of lore on European energy centers and what fits into modern witchcraft. So the three cauldrons are usually described in the way I would look at them from a chakra perspective is the lower cauldron really deals with our life force, being present in the world, our physicality, our kind of vital life force to fend off illnesses and to really fulfill and take action in the world. And it's in the lower body and really encapsulates what we think of as the root, the belly, and the solar plexus. Then there's a cauldron in the heart. And the cauldron of the heart deals with our emotions, just like the heart chakra would be. And in the poetry, it's described as tipped on its side, and it takes great sorrow or great joy to tip it upright so it can fill up. So the bottom cauldron's upright in everybody, and that's our life force. If you didn't have the bottom cauldron, then you wouldn't have anything to be present and to be here. But the heart, not everybody's heart chakra is really opened. So they describe it as a heart cauldron, and not everybody's heart cauldron is upright. So it takes some kind of deep emotional experience that brings you to that place of love and openness that flips over that cauldron so it can fill up and energize. And then the final cauldron is the cauldron of the head, or the cauldron of the skull, that deals with inspiration. And that's where they say the source of all poetry and magic comes from. And in almost everybody, it's turned completely upside down. And it takes that inspiration from the gods, and it takes being able to fill the cauldron of the heart to be able to flip that cauldron of the skull so you can really receive these three rays of inspiration, these kind of rays of divine insight and poetry and magic. And then that overflows from the cauldron, and it's very much like kind of awakening to the crown chakra, although the cauldron of the head is usually described as encompassing the throat, the third eye, and the crown chakra, so all these kind of upper worldly powers that we might associate with poetry and psychic senses and magic and enlightenment. So it's an alternate kind of view in working with the chakras. So since I was working with models of threes, the initial system was about working with the three rays as energies, just like you'd invoke the colors of the rainbow or the power of the planets, and invoking them through these three cauldrons and doing workings to prepare the lower cauldron. And the lower cauldron really, in my vision, dealt with a lot of the elements of earth and air and fire and water. And then the heart cauldron really dealt with, in ceremonial magic, they equate a lot of the heart area with the hexagram. And the hexagram is symbolic of the 7 planets, the sun in the center, and then the 6 magical planets of the ancients around it. So it would be the moon and Mercury and Venus and Mars and Jupiter and Saturn. And then that tends to connect us to the heavens. And then the heavens really with this power, love, and wisdom kind of descending into the crown.
All right. Let me pick up somewhere something else that was really interesting to me, that I'm curious how you feel about it. Now, many practitioners rely on amulets and talisman, and one of the exercises in your book is making a 3-ray cord to evoke the power of all 3 rays into our lives. So in your opinion, how important are talisman? Because I've heard the argument that they're just things or crutches and not really needed in practicing.
Well, I don't think that they're needed depending on the spirituality that you practice, but I think they're a big part of witchcraft, and if we have a rich history for it, then there might be a reason behind it. I don't think the reasons behind it, though, have been really greatly articulated in modern witchcraft. So my own understanding about working with tools in any way, whether it be the tools in your altar, like your athame or your wand or your cup, or whether it be a chalice or a cord or any type of charm or amulet or herbal preparation. I think we come from a paradigm where the physical world is sacred. And not only is it sacred, but I come from particularly a theology that's very animistic. So I believe everything has consciousness, everything has awareness to it. So when we're making a potion or we're crafting a charm or we're working with a tool, it starts out when you first are on the path as a tool, because it's very hard in our modern culture to think of it as anything else. But as you awaken to these spiritual realities, you realize it's really a partner. It's really a spiritual entity. There's a consciousness to the herbs that you use in your potion. There's a consciousness to the materials that we have. And that when you do magic with them, you're entering into a partnership with it. So Are they useless on their own? Yes. If you don't know what you're doing and you try to do magic just because a book says, this is what you should mix together, it's not like chemistry. It's not going to go boom. But if you have a consciousness to it, you can catalyze these properties, you can engage the spirits of these material objects, and they start to work with you, and you start to craft them in partnership. And I think that not only helps us realize the sanctity of the physical world, but it helps not only our consciousness evolve, but the consciousness of whatever we're using, whether it be a metal, whether it be a mineral, whether it be an herb, whether it be a color or other type of tool that's been crafted. Everything in we talked a little bit about the Garden of the Gods before, everything in the Garden of the Gods gets to evolve together, but it takes those partnerships. So is it necessary? No, just like you can practice without being in a community. But, when you practice a magical tradition, part of your community is nature. So the more you're able to actively engage with nature, and this is one of the powerful ways to do it, then the more success you have.
Mm-hmm. Now, simply put, the Garden of the Gods is a state of consciousness that's achieved by the Garden of the Gods ritual. Now, how important is it to be able to reach to that level? And aside from doing all the exercises in the book prior to even attempting it, how deep must we dig within ourselves to get there?
Well, I think a lot of the exercises in the book, and I think a lot of magical exercises in any tradition, is ultimately about moving through blocks. And I think we come from a culture that feels blocked and inhibited from nature, from sexuality, from spirituality incarnate. We think that, and we kind of come these preconceived spiritual notions that the world's a bad place and we're trying to get away from it. To be spiritual means to ascend and to go someplace else, to leave the world behind. And the Garden of the Gods is about really reaching that level of consciousness while in body, to really recognize the sacredness everywhere. But we have to move through our blocks that prevent us from getting there. We have to move through our shames, we have to move through our guilts, we have to move through, what a lot of us call the shadow from a psychological perspective. So whatever exercises, whatever digging deep that helps you really recognize it and transform those things so they're no longer blocks but they're allies, that's what's necessary to get there. The ritual can kind of set the stage, and at various times when I've done the ritual, personally I've been more and less successful, and different people going through have had different levels of success, but it gives you a taste of what it is to feel that connected. And the goal, I think, for the witch seeking enlightenment is to try to be more connected more of the time. We all go through up and down phases, but I think you kind of reach through barriers where your consciousness changes. Where I'm at now is very different from where I was when I started this journey, and I expect that 15 years from now I'll be in a very different place too, and all you can do is do your best day by day.
Well, that's what I was going to kind of ask you, because there may be people that read the book, go through the exercises, get to that point, but maybe they're not ready, because, we all grow at different paces and everything, and so somebody that's starting out that may not have a lot of other, I don't want to use the word background, but I will, it may not work for them at that point. So do you subscribe, maybe, all right, put it away for a while, keep on your path and then try it again, rather than get discouraged and say, this isn't going to work?
Well, I think, it's all about being properly prepared. It's about figuring out what's right for you in any given moment. You might get to any point in any book, this one included, and say, I need to work on this section more before I go forward, and that's okay. And you might need to learn other things from other sources before you can go forward, and I think that's great too. I think if you have the opportunity to experience the ritual, not only do I do it in various festivals, but now I found that other people are attempting and trying to work with this material and might share it in other group settings. If you have people who have experienced and can kind of set the tone of ritual, to be able to experience it. When I do it at festivals, people haven't worked through the whole book. They're just passingly familiar with kind of a crash course 101 on the concepts of it. But that sense of community and that sense of communion with flesh and spirit can be very empowering and inspiring for the future. So if you have a chance to undergo it in kind of safe conditions and to be able to experience it without being responsible for it all, if you don't feel like you're up for running it for yourself, I still would recommend that. But, once you feel like you've gotten to the place in your ritual skill sets that you want to do it. And I think that's one of the reasons, too, why I don't say the book's necessarily a beginner's book, because a lot of the basic ritual skills are not taught in this book. There's kind of an assumption of a certain level of competence. Then you can go forward and try it and see how it works for you. I think the worst that's going to happen is that maybe it's not going to work at that moment. But I think you'll still probably be able to glean something out of it, even if it's, what's blocking you from it working in that moment.
All right, so writing this book was more than coming up with the idea and sitting down and writing it. It was actually a personal journey for you. So what has this particular journey taught you, and is it still ongoing?
Oh, absolutely. In my own traditions and what I teach in the Temple of Witchcraft, and we actually just got our 501c3 status as a federally recognized organization, we work through 5 kind of foundational levels. And what the work of the Three Rays has taught me is that there's more to kind of add to that. And I think some additional teachings and the philosophies already have been integrated into the temple, but the additional teachings are going to be based kind of on these 3 rays. As I don't know if there'll be additional 3 degrees, but there'll definitely be kind of 3 areas of further development, whether it be with the King's Path and the angelic training and fairy path training and animal and ancestral training, but to kind of go deeper into these mysteries. And the deeper I go, then I'm always kind of commissioned by the spirits to share it with other people, and their experiences help inform mine and give me better ways to teach it and to experience it. So I feel like right now I've stepped back onto the King's Path for a while, and I'm working a lot with angelic and star lore. And so it still fits really into the Three Rays philosophy, but it's also kind of synchronizing with the material I already teach in the Temple of Witchcraft and the things that have really supported me. And I'm actually kind of going back to some of the roots in witchcraft. I started out in the Cabot tradition and studying with Laurie Cabot, and it has a very strong Arthurian mythos to it. And I'm looking to this Celtic Arthurian mythos and trying to see how that informs what I'm doing now and how that relates to the Three Rays in the Temple of Witchcraft. And it's all kind of gelling together in ways that I wouldn't have intellectually created, but seem to be inspired in the moment by the spirits.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell us a little bit about your other books, the other titles, Temple of Witchcraft, and your workshops, because those are kind of really good. Some people are readers, some people are listeners, and the workshops might be really good for those that don't have the patience to sit and read or need kind of a group environment.
Right, yeah. Almost all of my books, with the exception maybe of Three Rays, have been created from workshops. I usually teach a topic for quite a while, and once I feel like I'm really comfortable with the material and know that it works not just for me but for other people, that's when I sit down and write the books. And so I have a series of books that are probably what I'm best known for, called the Temple of Witchcraft series. And the first one's called the Inner Temple of Witchcraft, and it's pretty much my textbooks for training. It's really the books that I wished I had to go kind of deeper and in different directions. And there's 6 of the books, and they represent the 5 levels of training that I still continue to practice and bring students of mine through. I really look at it as having 5 different mysteries to it. So there's the mysteries of psychic abilities, what I consider to be the oracular mysteries of prophecy and psychic vision. There's the fertility mysteries in the 2nd degree, which is the Outer Temple of Witchcraft book, and that's what most people think of as Wicca today. It's the Wheel of the Year, it's casting the circle, it's the elements, but it also gets into deeper relationships with all those things, and how we really forge partnerships with the gods and the elements and the forces of nature. The 3rd degree is the Temple of Shamanic Witchcraft, and it deals with the ecstatic mysteries, how we kind of travel to the spirit worlds and we're free from the flesh and commune in the spirit worlds. And then the 4th mystery really deals with the Kabbalistic training and what I consider to be the Gnostic mysteries, trying to really be inspired by direct knowledge and direct revelation, but using the Tree of Life and the Qabalah as kind of a foundation because it influences so much of modern witchcraft and modern occultism in general. And then the last training is the Living Temple of Witchcraft, which was divided into 2 volumes, and it really deals with our training of the high priestesses and the high priests. And the first half of it is all about kind of the personal mysteries that the student undergoes, and the second half is more preparing for the seminary work and how to deal with people and lead community and, have a healing practice and all the kind of practical and professional things that go with the vocation of the craft. So those are the main books that I tend to focus on and what a lot of my teachings come from. I teach workshops on these classes and various kind of weekend topics and one-night topics all across the country. And, I'm usually on the road at least one weekend, if not 2 weekends a month. So chances are I might be someplace near you soon.
And if anybody wants to find out more about this stuff, they can go to your website, which is ChristopherPenczak.com, right?
Right. That's right. That's the 2011 schedule should be posted soon, and I post things on Facebook. I have an author's page on Facebook and have a mailing list through my website if you want to get a little monthly update of what's going on and some helpful information. So there's lots of ways of finding.
Great. I've got one question from the chat room that we're going to have to answer really, really quick because her time is running out. But Cece in the chat wants to know if you see the three rays as a representation of the three stages of life.
That's a great question, and I'd probably say no, because I think certain people may walk one of those rays as their primary path in this lifetime, so I don't think they're necessarily sequential. I think different people start out in different places, and particularly if they choose a primarily magical path, they'll move from ray to ray, kind of with that crooked line as it goes back and forth, but I'd say probably not the three phases of life. So, at least for me, maybe somebody else will experience it that way.
All right. Well, thanks. I mean, the time flew by. The break didn't help. But I want to thank you so much for being here tonight. It was a pleasure. And hopefully you can come back down the line sometime and talk some more about this because it really is fascinating. Do appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I appreciate being on. Thank you.
Great. And guys, we're out of time. So I want to invite you all back next week for a very special broadcast. Instead of the once-a-month Rev and Witch show, Reverend Tim Shaw and I will be joining John Zappis, our own Dave Jones, Rosemary Ellen Guiley, and our ceiling cat, Barbara Duncan, for a 2-hour discussion on the nature of evil. It starts at 8 o'clock Eastern next Thursday, and we'll see you there. And if your curiosity is piqued about it, Reverend Tim and I will be popping into Dave and John's show this Sunday night to talk a little bit more. So, in the meantime, everyone, blessed be and merry meet again. Good night.
This has been another edition of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Be sure to tune in next week at the same time for another great guest and more fun. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2009.